Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hi folks, welcome to another episode of Pro Football in the 1970s. I'm your host Joe Zagorski, and in this episode we'll be exploring the years of ultimate futility. Now, there were 4 years where pro football fans got to witness several examples of ultimate futility during the 1970s. And there were the teams that could only win one game during a 14-game regular season. This category also continues one team that could not win a single game in a hapless and somewhat legendary inaugural campaign. Let's tackle first the 1971 Buffalo Bills. Then we'll go into the 72 and 73 Houston Oilers, and finally we'll discuss the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All three of those teams have one thing in common. They stunk up the field. I mean, they were putrid. Winning a single game was a challenge for each one of these teams, and of course, as we know from the 76 Bucs, it was an impossibility. But more on them later. Let's address each one of these NFL teams chronologically. The 1971 Buffalo team may have had a superstar tailback in the form of O.J. Simpson, but they unfortunately had little else. Their offense could score only 18 touchdowns all year long. When you consider that 5 of those touchdowns was scored in their opening game loss against the Dallas Cowboys, well, you can see how pitiful the Bills' offensive production was for the rest of the 71 season. Of course, Buffalo's defense did not really inspire much confidence either. They gave up a total of 394 points in 1971. By the end of that season, the Bills would be happy to throw in the towel. But there was at least some measure of hope. In 1972, they would rehire Lou Saban, the coach that led them to a pair of AFL championships in 1964 and 1965. Eventually, Buffalo would become a stronger team during the next several years. The 1972 and 1973 Houston Oilers were anything but strong, however. They just had what could rightly be considered as 2 of the most miserable consecutive seasons in modern NFL history. Houston could muster just 1 victory in each of those 2 years. The Oilers had a few pretty good players on their roster during those years, however. They had a young Dan Pastorini at quarterback, Ken Burrow at wide receiver, and future Hall of Famer defensive lineman Elvin Bethea. Unfortunately, those 3 players, and indeed most of Houston's players, were young and mostly inexperienced. The 1972 and 1973 seasons would deliver that experience for everyone on the Oilers lineup. The 72 Houston offense managed to score just 164 points, which ranked as the lowest mark in the AFC. Their defense surrendered 380 points, which stood out as the most points surrendered in the entire NFL. In 6 of their games, the Oilers' defense permitted at least 30 points, and in their final game of the season, they were routed by the Cincinnati Bengals 61-17. In 5 of their games, Houston's 1972 offense scored just 7 or fewer points. Things did not really get any better for Houston in 1973, particularly in the one-loss column, as they repeated their 1-13 record from 1972. True, the 73 Oilers did score 35 more points than they did in the previous year, but their defense gave up a whopping 447 points, which easily ranked as the worst mark in all of pro football. They gave up 67 more points in 1973 than they did in 1972. That's the equivalent of an extra 2 to 3 games. As a result, Houston's defense in 1973 ranked as the worst in the NFL. But a silver lining was nevertheless visible in the form of head coach Sid Gilman, who would improve this team in 1974 to finish that year with a 7-7 record. But the team that most fans recognize as owning the ultimate in futility during the 1970s was the 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the winless 0-14 Buccaneers. They were the butt of most jokes in the NFL during that 76 season. Going a whole season without winning a single game will do that. The 1976 Bucs offense was its weakest element. They scored just 125 points, which ranked as dead last in the league. They also committed 37 turnovers in 1976. Tampa Bay's defense did not really frighten any opponents either. They ranked as the 27th worst defense out of 28 teams in the NFL in 1976, as they permitted 412 points that year. The 1976 Buccaneers were shut out 5 times in 14 games. That mark alone shows you how inept their offense was. They even managed to lose at home to the other expansion team in 1976, the Seattle Seahawks, in the 6th week of that season. Indeed, it would be near the end of the following year that Tampa Bay would finally obtain their first victory. These teams that experienced ultimate and uninspiring futility is in the past, however. With the way that parity has such a big role in the NFL today, and with the increased number of regular season games, it is a rarity that any team fails to achieve at least a couple of wins each year in the current NFL environment. Now for this episode's trivia question: who was the head coach of the 1971 Buffalo Bills? Thanks a lot for listening in today to Pro Football in the 1970s. Take care, and we'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.